Greetings, children. So today we are continuing our discussion of the Pythagorean rule, except today, instead of finding the hypotenuse of a triangle, we're going to talk about how to find one of the legs. So the formula that we used was c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And that, if you recall, says that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the legs. The hypotenuse is c, and the legs are a and b. So in a triangle that's a right triangle, the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle, and then the legs are the two sides that make up the right angle. So we looked at, if we knew what the two legs were, how to find the hypotenuse. But what if we don't know what one of the legs are? What if we know the hypotenuse is 5 and one of the legs is 4, for example? How can we find that other leg? Well, we use the same rule, but it's a good idea to rearrange it. So instead of c squared equals a squared plus b squared, we're going to write it like this: a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So this is when you're finding a leg. We're going to write it with a and b on the one side, c on the other side. And then we're going to substitute in the parts we know. So we don't know a, so we just leave it as a squared. We know b is 4, and we know c is 5. So I have a squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. Now we're going to evaluate this. We're going to say 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, and now we have a squared plus 16 equals 25. So if you recall from your equation solving, our next step is to subtract 16 from both sides. So you get that a squared equals 9. And then once again, we're going to take the square root of both sides, the square root of a squared and the square root of 9. So we get a equals 3. So there's our answer, a equals 3. So you can see, instead of using the formula with c squared equals a squared plus b squared, we're just going to flip it and put a squared and b squared on the left, c on the other side, and then solve. So let's take another look at this example. We substituted in 4 for b, 5 for c. We squared both of them, so 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25. And then we subtracted 16 because we want to get a squared by itself and then eventually get that to be a. So after subtracting 16, you get that a squared is equal to 9. Take the square root of both sides. Square root of a squared is a, square root of 9 is 3. Now, it is possible, just like we talked about yesterday, that you're going to have numbers that don't work out so lovely. So you might have that c is 12 and b is 8 and you don't know a. So that would mean you'd have a squared plus 8 squared equals 12 squared. A squared plus 64 equals 144. And then we would subtract 64 from both sides, and we get a squared is equal to 0 here. 14 minus 6 is 80. So a squared is equal to 80. Take the square root of both sides, and we get that a squared is equal to the square root of 80. So grab your book. Let me go ahead and grab mine here. Well, and then you're going to look up the square root of 80. And remember, that's in the back of your book on page 419. So square root 80. And it has it rounded to 8.944. We're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So here we would get a equals 8.944. Remember, this is approximately equal, so we do a wavy equal sign. And then we're going to round it to the nearest tenth, so 8 8.9 is our answer. So A equals 8.9. Now, the nice thing about this formula is that it works. You can find A or B. So let's look at an example where we don't know what B is. So let's say we had 5 and we know A is 3, but we're not sure what B is yet. So here you would just have 3 squared plus B squared equals 5 squared. Now make sure that your B doesn't look too much like a 6. Otherwise you might say 3 squared plus 6 squared, and you'd get that wrong, of course. So B squared equals 25. And then we would subtract 9 from both sides. Get that B squared is equal to 16. Square root of B squared and the square root of 16. And here we get that B is equal to 4. So you can find either A or B when you're finding the legs. And of course, we already talked about how to find C in the previous lesson. So, when you're working these out, just remember, write down the formula, plug in the parts you know, evaluate those, solve for B or A, whichever one's missing, and then you'll get your answer. So that's the Pythagorean theorem, or the Pythagorean rule as your book calls it, and that's how you can find either the hypotenuse or the legs, depending on which parts you know. So thanks, have a great day, see you next time.